If you're pouring your heart into your podcast, but still struggling to turn those listeners into paying clients, I've got something just for you. Imagine having a clear, simple plan to turn your listeners into buyers without relying on a huge audience or spending hours on social media. That's exactly what we'll create together in a podcast profit plan discovery call. During this free 20-minute call, I'll help you discover more opportunities for profit in your podcast and give you the next best step to turn your show into a client attracting machine. If I've got an offer that will help you expedite this process, then we can also discuss working together. Book your free podcast profit plan discovery call now by going to podcastingformoms.co/profit plan or by clicking the link in the show notes. I can't wait to chat with you. If your podcast currently feels like a weekly scramble of recording at the last second, editing at midnight, throwing together graphics while your kids are asking for snacks, and trying to remember if you even uploaded your episode yet, then this episode is for you. Because honestly, I don't think podcasting is supposed to feel this chaotic. And I think a lot of podcasters are unintentionally making podcasting way harder and more time consuming than it actually needs to be, especially moms. Because here's the thing. You do not need 40-hour work weeks, a giant team, or complicated systems to run a successful podcast. But you do need workflows that support your real life. So today I want to talk about how to streamline your podcast workflows and systems so that your podcast actually fits into your life instead of consuming it. We're going to be talking about batching, reducing friction, simplifying your workflow, how I personally manage my podcast workflow, the mistakes that I made that wasted so much time, and how to create sustainable visibility without constantly feeling behind. Let's get into it. Welcome to Podcasting for Moms, the show for moms in business ready to start, grow, and scale a podcast that turns their listeners into buyers. I'm Jenny Soneson, a podcast strategist and fellow mom entrepreneur. You're in the right place if you want to learn how to start and grow a podcast that attracts your ideal clients and really does the heavy lifting for you when it comes to selling your offers, all while balancing life as a busy mom. Are you ready to create a podcast that grows your income, impact, and influence? Let's make podcasting work for you, because as moms, we know how to get things done. All right, let's jump into the episode. Hey, and welcome back to Podcasting for Moms, the podcast where we talk about starting, growing, and scaling your podcast in a way that actually works for real life and motherhood. And honestly, this conversation feels more important than ever because I think so many podcasters are burned out. Not because podcasting itself is impossible, but because their systems are chaotic. And as someone who has ADHD and 2 kids, I can tell you right now, working ahead and having systems in place genuinely changes everything for me. Because when everything is living in my brain, and when I'm trying to remember what needs to happen next, and when I'm creating everything from scratch every single week, podcasting starts to feel heavy. But when I have repeatable workflows, templates, systems, and a plan, podcasting feels so much lighter. And that's really what I want for you. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that podcasters are making right now is that they are podcasting in real time, meaning they're recording this week's episode this week. They're editing that episode this week. They're creating all the promo materials the same week and also uploading that same week. And then they're immediately starting over again every single week. And honestly, that is totally exhausting, especially if you're a mom, especially if your schedule changes constantly, and especially if you're trying to build your business in part-time hours, because life is just gonna life, let's be real. And if your podcast only survives when everything goes perfectly, it's gonna feel impossible to stay consistent. And that is why I'm such a huge believer in batching ahead and creating systems before you scale. Because sustainable visibility matters more than intensity, and consistency matters more than frequency, and planning ahead creates consistency. Now, trust me, I definitely learned this the hard way. I used to wait until the last minute to do everything. I'd record at the last second, edit at the last second, upload at the last second, and I also used to massively over-edit my episodes. Like I was spending way too much time obsessing over tiny mistakes that no one else probably noticed. And honestly, that perfectionism wasted so much time. I also try to be everywhere, every platform, on every trend, every strategy, and that created so much mental clutter. Because instead of having streamlined systems, I was constantly reinventing the wheel every single week. And I see so many podcasters doing this now. They're creating new graphics every week, writing everything from scratch, changing their systems constantly, overcomplicating their workflows, and trying to manually do every single thing. And then they wonder why podcasting feels so overwhelming. Some podcasters are spending hours every single week doing things that honestly are not moving the needle. So I want to share what my workflow actually looks like now, because simplifying the process has made a big difference for me. So at the beginning of each quarter, I plan my podcast content based on what I'm promoting or launching that quarter. So instead of randomly deciding episode topics every week, I'm strategically planning ahead. And that alone reduces so much decision fatigue. Then once I have my topics for the quarter, I use AI tools like ChatGPT and Claude to help me outline my episodes. But I want to share something really important. I always prompt AI to ask me questions first so the content still sounds like me. Because I don't want generic content, I want strategic content in my voice. So that is a key step. When you are using tools like Claude and ChatGPT to outline for you. Then when it comes to recording, I love to batch record. I almost never sit down and record just one episode. Typically, I'm recording at least 2 episodes at a time, but ideally 4, so I get the whole month done in one fell swoop. Because once I'm in recording mode, I want to maximize that energy and momentum. So then for after recording, another thing I do is I batch edit as well. So I use a tool called Descript, which honestly saves me so much time because they have several different AI features built into the platform that I can use. And again, instead of editing one episode at a time throughout the week, I'll sit down and edit multiple episodes in one sitting. So that makes things a lot more streamlined. Then after editing, that's when I move into asset creation. So this is where I'm writing the episode descriptions, blog posts, social posts, emails, pulling video clips, creating Pinterest pins, and other graphics. And because I already have systems and repeatable workflows for this, it moves so much faster now. Then, after I get all those assets created, I schedule everything ahead of time into my podcast host, which is Buzzsprout, and then I schedule my blog posts on my website. And finally, once the episode is live, I share it on socials and send an email to my email list. Now, obviously, this does sound like a lot when I say it all together, but because it's systemized and repeatable, it actually takes me a lot less time than it used to. So now I want to share the real secret to time freedom. And I think that this is the part that people miss. Time freedom doesn't come from doing less necessarily. It comes from reducing friction. It comes from removing unnecessary steps, making decisions once, creating repeatable systems, simplifying your workflow, planning ahead, and stopping the constant cycle of scrambling, because scrambling is exhausting, especially for moms and for those of us whose nervous systems do not thrive in chaos and unpredictability. Working ahead genuinely helps me feel so much calmer. It helps me feel less reactive, less overwhelmed, and less mentally cluttered. And that is why I care so much about systems, not because I'm trying to create some hyper-productive, perfect business, but because I want podcasting to feel sustainable. I want your podcast to support your life, not consume it. So if podcasting currently feels overwhelming, here are a few things I encourage you to stop doing. I want you to stop creating everything from scratch. Templates are your best friend. I want you to stop obsessively editing every tiny thing. Most listeners do not care as much as you think they do. Sure, do a little sound correction so that everything is leveled and it's not super high or super low. You don't need to take out every single and every single little thing. Big mess up, sure. Audio leveling, sure, but you don't need to take out every little filler word because that is unnecessary. You also need to stop trying to be everywhere. You don't need to repurpose your podcast onto a billion different platforms to be successful. And you also need to stop waiting until the last minute because the last minute cycle is usually what creates the stress. And honestly, I think a lot of podcasters think that they have a consistency problem, but they really just have a workflow problem because they don't have an optimized workflow. So they don't get things out consistently because their workflow is not there. And I also want to say this because I know there are moms listening right now feeling guilty for being inconsistent with their show. You're not failing because motherhood changes your capacity. You're not behind because your schedule looks different now. And you don't need to run your podcast like someone with unlimited time and 0 interruptions. You just need to get systems that support your actual life. That is it. Because sustainable podcasting isn't about hustling harder. It's about creating workflows that allow you to stay visible consistently without burning yourself out. That is the ultimate goal. And if you're listening to this episode thinking, okay, I know my podcast systems are messy, or I know I'm overcomplicating things, or I know my workflow is not sustainable, that is exactly why I created the podcast audit. Because sometimes you're just too close to your own podcast to see the bottlenecks, inefficiencies, and invisible growth problems clearly. So inside the podcast audit, we look at your workflow, your strategy, your systems, your listener journey, your content, and what's actually creating unnecessary friction in your podcast. So if you want support simplifying your podcast strategy and creating a more sustainable podcast workflow, you can snag your podcast audit using the link in the show notes. All right, that's it for this episode. I'll see you next week. Thank you for tuning into Podcasting for Moms. I hope today's episode gave you the tools and inspiration you need to make your podcast work smarter, not harder. If you love what you heard, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It means the world and helps other moms in business find the show. For more tips, resources, and support, head to podcastingformoms.co. Remember, you're not just building a podcast, you're building your legacy. Until next time, friends.